Yo, what's up? It's Jimmy. I'm from Glitchy Thumbs. We're making characters, we're making games the glitchy way. In today's episode, we have character 3.3, which is different from Ghosts in character 1.1, but that's the first character I actually started with. Definitely check that video out and check out all the other previous characters that I worked on. We're going to be creating the 3D model in Blender. Let's get to the video. I shift my reference over so that we can actually create character 3.3, which is the ghost character on the far left. This is one of those spooky ghosts. A little abstract, but that's how the sketch was. It resembles a ghost. That's what we're blocking out in Blender. This should be fairly straightforward. If you're familiar with my process, it's always going to be the same, except later on in my other characters that I work on. We start with a plane, scale it down, move it into place. I should shift this sketch to the side, and that's right on the dot. I'm really not reviewing the videos. I mean, I drew these characters and I created all these 3D models in Blender. I guess I have an idea of when things are supposed to happen, so I'm shifting it right now. That's why I turned on this arrow toggle so that I can select the reference. I like creating backups of almost everything. That's why I'm creating a backup for this instead of actually rotating my original sketch. I'd rather not spend my time rotating things, just make a duplicate. That duplicate is going to have the rotation. We can always revert back to the previous reference when we block out the other characters. I'm making this ghost a little bit more straighter, otherwise it's going to come out crooked. When you make things straight, it's a little bit much more easier to block everything out. It's easier to use the mirror modifier if I do need that. Most likely I always will use the mirror modifier. Now I'm moving the plane at the bottom of the reference. Select these vertices on the right side, extrude to the far right. This includes the arms of the spooky ghosts. Spooky ghosts. We'll just call them spooky. Actually, spooky ghost is cool. Grab these vertices on the left, extrude to the far left. Select the entire plane, move it down just a little bit so we can grab a little bit more of the bottom. Select these vertices at the top, extrude all the way up. One of the arms is a little bit bigger than the other. So most likely I either use a mirror to mirror one of the arms to the other side, or maybe I do both arms different. I completely forgot. We'll just see as we progress through the video. I'll make a loop cut on the right side. Use the middle mouse button to create 2 loop cuts instead of 1. Do the same thing on the left side, making sure to keep everything straightened out and aligned as always. And at the top, I make multiple horizontal loop cuts. This gives us a pretty nice mesh to work with. During this time, I transitioned into removing any dead space, selecting any of these faces that aren't really touching the reference and deleting them. You can visually see that because it makes sense. You don't need those areas anyways. You only need the areas that are touching the reference. Anything that's helping you block out your character is what you're going to keep. Once you remove some of the dead space, you can start moving your vertices in. You're going to have to make a judgment call on whether moving vertices in is best with that vertex or make a loop cut so that you can actually have specific vertices stay in place as you organize and try to wrap this around your character. I'm actually deleting this face because there was a lot of dead space, I guess. It's barely touching the reference. We already have that extra vertex that we just created from the loop cut. We can just move that into place. I guess I changed my mind by pressing undo, and that happens. As you're blocking out your character, you're going to see things that you normally won't see, and you're going to make better decisions. I decided to make another loop cut horizontally at the bottom. This way, we actually get a much more closer shape to our reference. If I did it the other way, we won't be able to get it this close to get that more rounded corner for the bottom of this spooky ghost. Now we can delete some more of this dead space. You see this shape is actually a fairly odd shape. Normally, we don't really need this small face. I could just delete it. For the sake of the reference, we'll just stick with that and try to delete some of the vertices that we don't need. Like this one here, I just dissolved that vertex and just kept one of them so that we have some sort of sharp corner here. Again, we're just going for something simple. Doesn't have to be complex. I'll make another horizontal loop cut, delete those faces. If you've been watching my videos, you'll notice that this is the newest way that I was doing it during this time. That's what I've worked my way up to, where I just create a long plane, extrude it out, and then start removing the dead space by deleting the faces we don't need, and then organizing as we go. This process is actually going to change as I put out more videos because it's changed a lot so far since I've been working on a lot of characters. You'll be able to see that if you've been tuning into my videos. Hopefully all this stuff is helping. I'm trying to make this as explanatory as possible, but in the most simplest way, because that's just how my brain works. I learn complex things and try to make it as simple as possible, just because I just rather have everything simple in my life. It's just easier to remember all the patterns. If you want to build a habit, you got to remember specific patterns to repeat, especially if you want to get better and better. This is what I'm doing to get better at character design. Blender is actually pretty complex. There's a lot of things you can learn, but I learn things one at a time. We're making more loop cuts in the middle now. As you make more loop cuts, you'll notice there's going to be a lot more dead space that you can just delete. I'm a pretty visual person, so I start seeing different things as I make more loop cuts. There's more ways to actually cut and block out your character. I use the knife tool to cut out this triangle on the right side. That's something I started implementing as well. Being able to delete faces that you don't need, but also knifing the areas that you don't need. What I do in some of the future videos that I'm going to be putting out is creating a big plane with a bunch of loop cuts, but then around the character, you'll just knife all the dead space. That makes everything much more easier, and that's simple. Most likely, you guys won't be able to see that until I actually get to those videos. I'm trying my best, putting as much content as I can. You just have to be creative and try to figure out how to block out your characters. Like here, on the right side, I decided to subdivide between these vertices. That way we can just knife across to the other side. We can delete this triangle and slowly make our way into the armpits of the ghost. I've been trying to keep track of all my characters by numbering them, but it's actually pretty hard to remember what character is which unless I actually see something visual. But I have a spreadsheet with a bunch of checklists so that I know which character I'm actually on. Otherwise, I'm not going to really remember, but I can always refer back to the videos if I need to. Since this edge that we just made is kind of out of place, probably best to actually knife to the left side. So I actually subdivide to create a vertex on the left so that we can just knife from this vertex to the left side. That keeps our geometry aligned. I'm just trying to make horizontal and vertical loop cuts as best as I can. It's just how my brain organizes it. You can make some pretty messy topology if you want, but that affects the UV unwrap portion and also the texture paint portion. If you do plan to use this for games, you gotta be pretty wary about that. That's what I'm thinking about as I'm creating these characters. Blocking out is very different for each character because of the shape. There's gonna be a bunch of different things that I do. It might seem like I'm just saying the same thing. I am, but at the same time, each character is different. You have to block it out a certain way. To me, it all looks the same, but it might look different to you guys. Each character is different, and you can see how I actually blocked it out. Every time I delete faces and I see areas where it's just like a crevice, like it is on the right side, that bothers me because then I have to try to fill in a little triangle. And I'd rather just not do that. I'd rather think about how can I get rid of all this dead space without having to do an extra step of filling it in. That's what I was thinking about during this time. Like I said, it's just better to knife into your shape because you can actually get the shape that you want, especially if it's going to be low poly. You can just think of things as triangles or squares. This way, by knifing that triangle, I can delete these 4 faces because there's just dead space anyways. We're able to get the right side pretty close. Still looks a little bit off. For this vertex, we can actually wield it together with the vertex on the right side. Turn on target wield, which is in my quick favorites. Drag this over, and now they merged together. Back into quick favorites, turn it off. And then just align these vertex on the bottom, keep everything straight. The right side looks pretty good. At the top, make a horizontal loop cut, delete that face, use the knife tool, cut this triangle, delete that face, cut another triangle, delete that. You can see the knife tool is pretty useful in the blocking out portion to get the actual shape that you want for your character. So just use that in your method if you're creating your own characters, or even just anything. You can just create anything. I'm just focusing on characters because I want to see what I come up with of all these different ideas. If I see a character, I think of different things, especially if they're all different types of characters. All my sketches are super abstract and they're all very different from each other. So I'll end up thinking about different game ideas. That's my end goal, trying to get to that full game, like I've been mentioning. I have some ideas that I've gotten to, but I haven't finished. So we'll see what I come up with. It's good to actually have it down. I have all the save files that I need. If I do want to expand upon some ideas, I'll definitely do that. Now I'm just focusing on character design because it's just been fun, and that's where my mind wants to stick towards. The middle is pretty easy. You see a lot of dead space with all these rectangles. You could just knife to the outer vertex, drag it in. Remember, the goal is not to be a perfectionist. You can just get away with low poly designs starting out. We're making prototype games, and as we progress in our game development, then we can go in and actually polish them. So what I plan to do, have a bunch of prototypes. If the games do well, then I'll continue to work on it, possibly go in and refix anything that needs fixing, like the coloring, maybe redoing the character, if people love the character, stuff like that. Right now, this is just all experimental. We don't even know if anyone likes like character 3.3, the spooky ghost. Maybe people do, but we just have to see and get to that point. I try to do things based on motivation. Like, am I really going to be motivated to finish this ghost game? Possibly, depending on the game mechanic or whatever idea they come with. I do have a game mechanic that I thought of for character 3.3, which will be shown in the next video for the BuildBox portion. Stay tuned for that, and you'll see what I actually came up with. The blocking out portion is going to be pretty long, so I try my best to get through as much as possible. I'm pretty sure you guys gotten the point. If you've been watching my videos, I've been making a lot of characters. It's pretty straightforward. Start with a plane, make some loop cuts, remove any dead space, and then knife any of the additional dead space, organize the outer vertices, and just try to create a very low poly design that matches your reference. Towards the end, everything will turn out pretty fine. Towards the head, you can see it's like super sharp here. If you want a more rounder head, you can just subdivide between these two vertices, drag it out, you get a more circular head. This is actually turning out pretty well. The mouth is a little bit weird. Yes, I know, but that's okay. We still know that's a ghost with two eyes and a mouth that's super dark, but that's the fun part. This is all supposed to be fun. This character definitely looks a little bit more spookier, like a Halloween type character. I'd make multiple loop cuts up above the left arm. I just delete those faces. We don't really need all that dead space. Just drag that into place. This process is actually getting very familiar to me, so I know exactly how to create any character that I want. I'm trying to make sure that I actually improve. I'm just looking for multiple ways to actually create the same character or my new characters, just using a different method to see which one's faster. I've been mentioning that I use a cube and a subdivision surface modifier now. That just seems much better to get a more rounder shape for my characters, and we don't have to pull out the edges like we do for the plane method. I feel like that takes a good amount of time doing that. I mean, not a lot of time, but we could go without it if we can. I would rather just create a shape that I like and have it all rounded out and shaped in a 3D mesh without having to do all the extra tedious stuff. That's what I've been looking for as I'm creating more characters, just trying to avoid a lot of the tedious stuff. I mean, if I have to do it, I'll do it. But if I don't, I'd rather just do that so I have more time to spend on the more complicated things. You don't want to spend all your time doing all the tedious stuff, the stuff that's going to take all of your time. If you have to do things one by one, I'd rather spend most of my time trying to build the full game. The thing is, I need characters to keep me on track because every character is new. So then I have a new motivation, a new source of energy to actually build more games. I'm just going off of that as momentum. I mean, making characters is pretty fun, especially if it's your own characters. I mean, I can make a lot of these characters that's already very popular, but then again, I can't use them. I'll most likely only be able to use them for artwork, but I want to make some characters from scratch that no one really knows about, try to create some sort of story around them. Possibly they'll be bigger than whatever it is on the screen as a sketch. We'll just see what happens as I go on this journey looking for the superstar. That's what I'm calling it. Looking for my character, or there might be multiple characters that will be superstars. We just have to get to that game mechanic. We're going to be able to use all these characters as experience and practice. That's really the only way to get better at anything. You got to just keep practicing. This is how I'm continuing to practice and get better at character design. I'm learning a lot in Blender. I'm learning a lot in BuildBox. I think There's a whole bunch of new things that I learned that I'm excited about. Being able to put more things into my toolkit as a game developer. Things that I was never able to do before, like creating my own characters from scratch using Procreate and the Apple Pencil. Whatever I thought of from my mind, I can actually draw it out now and create some cool concept art. But then also go into Blender, now watching how I'm creating the mesh and making that into a 3D model. We go through the process of actually unwrapping it, texture painting it, rigging it, and animating it. That's a pretty rigorous process. But also, after that, you get to bring it over into BuildBox and actually create some cool game mechanics, and hopefully into a full game. That's an entire process that I've been able to do so far on my own, which is pretty cool, not having to rely on designers and programmers and artists to do all that stuff. It's just so much easier to have meetings with yourself, make those decisions as quick as possible, just get things moving. I really don't like waiting. I mean, I'm pretty patient most of the time, but if I have an idea, I want to get on that idea as quick as possible. Otherwise, I'm going to forget and then end up hopping on another idea. I try to jot down as much things as possible for each character whenever the idea comes around. I just try my best to stay on track. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because everything is experience. So as I'm creating these videos, as I'm creating all these characters, it's helping out my content creation, because that's also one thing on my list too, is getting better at creating content. That's why you're seeing me create all these videos. I really don't have to do any of these voiceovers if I don't want to. Could just do a time lapse and possibly put some music. But I actually like talking about the thought process and my own workflow. It helps me put a lot of things that I'm doing into words if I ever need to go back to anything. But if anyone asks me what I do for work or something, I can always refer them to my YouTube channel and you can actually understand what the hell I do. That's something I've always wanted to do, just record everything. People know I make games, but what type of games and where can they actually learn more is actually a little bit different. It was really hard to explain to people. You could just say the basic things like, oh yeah, I make games and stuff. It's actually much better to have everything recorded and people can actually refer to it if they need to. If they don't, that's fine too. This is all content for me, so I can refer back to later on when we actually get to that final game. I should say full game. It's gonna showcase all the things that I actually had to go through to get to that game. That's the most important part of the entire journey. I really like the process. That's just my thing. I really learned a lot about people's workflows and processes. I know what I'm doing is going to be super helpful to a lot of people, because not a lot of people are able to record everything that they do and also explain it in a way that's super easy to understand. That's why I'm doing it. I've always wanted to do this ever since I started making games. I've always explained it to people, and you know, sometimes it goes over people's heads because there's just a lot to digest. It's just easier to have it in one source for someone to review over and over if they wanted to. If I put this on social media, anyone can just always rewatch this as much as they can. It's easier on their time. It makes more sense. For the bottom of the ghost's arms, I tried to make this zigzag design. That's why you see me pull these vertices up. It gives the ghost a little bit more style versus how my sketch was. It's a little bit straight at the bottom, but if we pull these vertices up, you get more of a stylized arm. When I think of this ghost, it's kind of like a person is under some sort of white blanket. I've actually dressed up as a ghost before for Halloween. I legit bought a white cloth, cut out some holes for the eyes and the mouth, and I just put it over my head. That's what this reminds me of. Possibly if I could find that picture, maybe I'll just put it up. That's what this reminds me of. I'm just thinking about Halloween right now. When I see character 3.3, I just see some thought bubbles in my head and it's saying boo. Quite possibly, maybe the theme of this mechanic for the second mechanic, if I do come back to this idea, will be a Halloween theme. It could actually be a hide and seek game where you hide from ghosts, or you play as a ghost trying to find certain people. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe you do hide from ghosts, so you would be hiding from these ghosts that are trying to find you, or your goal is actually to not get caught as you walk through different scenery under a cloth, like I mentioned. But every time you move and then someone looks, you have to stop. Otherwise, if you keep moving, that's how you lose in the game. That's one game idea that I'm thinking about right now. I don't know though. We'll see. I don't really have the details just yet in my head. Other than that, it's going to be different than the mechanic that we see in the BuildBox portion because I've already recorded those videos. When I narrate that, you'll be able to see what I actually came up with during the time I recorded these videos. These are all old videos and I'm just narrating them now. That's why it might be a little bit confusing. I'm just trying to make sure this content is being used as best as it can. Enjoy making these thought process and workflow videos. It just makes more sense to me. It's a little bit more natural that I sit here and just talk over my own characters. Also, I might actually reuse some of these videos to create some tutorials. Really depends what people think as I put out these videos. We'll just see about the feedback. Let me know if you've been liking these videos. Would you rather have it longer? Would you rather have it shorter? Has it been helpful? Would you rather see more like tutorials or something? Well, I'll probably do both if I can, just because I want to know what type of content people are enjoying in terms of all the things that I'm doing. Now I'll just find a way to implement that with all of these characters as I progress and make more characters. We're finished blocking out the character. We got a very, very nice shape with the bottom area being a little bit more zigzag. Once we're done with that, we'll need to extrude the shape in the y-axis, delete the middle faces, apply all transforms, apply the quick origin to get the cursor back in the middle, add the mirror modifier in the y-axis, go into edit mode, select all, move the shape out so you can actually see the entire shape. They're being overlapped at the moment. Select these middle vertices, turn on clipping so that we can merge them together to create our 3D mesh. This looks pretty cool already, super flat, but it's still 3D. And this is the most basic way we can actually use our 3D shape. I could just use it this way and just apply a texture on top. That works just as fine. But I like pulling out the edges to give it a little bit more curvature. I've been doing a lot of edge slides around the edges of the character. Select specific edges. We start with the left side, edge slide. You can press G twice, which is grab, and it'll pull your edges in along your 3D model. So it's not stretching your character, it's just moving it along the geometry that's already created. That's how we create most of the curvature for the characters. Normally, be careful of selecting too many edges because you're going to be pulling in a bunch of faces that you don't need, but you can always fix that as you go. You see, we already have some nice curvature with these edge slides with the left arm, and then we make our way down to the bottom of character 3.3, the spooky ghost. You can see where my mind goes. I do things in groups. I started with the left arm, make my way around it with the edge slides, and then I make my way down to the body, which is the bottom part that we're looking at right now, starting with the left side and then down towards the middle, and then also the right side. So that's how I kind of group things for my 3D models as I'm trying to create the best curvature for this. I move into the right side, edge slide at the bottom, and then edge slide to the right, then finish off edge slide on the left side of the right arm. We move to the head, edge slide to the right, edge slide to the left. That's how you would do it to create the curvature around your character. You can adjust any vertices as you see fit as you move around your character. When you do edge slides, especially with the way I've been making my planes, there's going to be areas where it's dented like this in your 3D model. If it does this, you're going to need to knife a new face, which is what I do to create a face that's going to be appearing in front of us to avoid that dent. I just knife to the other side. That gives you an extra vertex that you can pull out. When you pull it out, it doesn't have that dent anymore. Without that dent, it's not going to have that sort of like shadow area. You're going to have to make this decision as you create your 3D models. Again, I'm not a pro at this. I'm just experimenting. Most of this stuff is just stuff that I learned along the way. It could be right. It could be wrong. At the end of the day, if I would finish this character and it looks like my reference, then I'm fine with that. If you want something much more concrete based on actual knowledge, you can probably look up some other videos on YouTube. They'll probably explain it much better than I can. I'm just explaining how I did it so that I remember. I just find that some of this stuff will be useful to a lot of people. Everyone learns differently. The way that I learn is in the most simplest terms. A lot of people are simple anyways. That just makes it easier to explain. Since we made that cut for that dent area. There's an extra vertex back here. You can always target wield and connect your vertices that you don't need. I was just trying to get rid of that dent. You can just do most of that by pulling the vertex back out. But then on the side view, I want to make sure everything is aligned as well. You really have to go around your character and see which vertex to pull back out. So far, this looks pretty cool. You know, as I'm making all these characters with the plane method, you can see there's specific cool low poly designs with these dents that you make into your character. You can see the rectangular shapes give it some sort of style. A lot of people stick with low poly designs. It really depends on your own preference. Sometimes I keep this, sometimes I don't. It just really depends on how it looks. But I apply a texture over it anyways, so you don't really get to see a lot of this on the model, especially if you do a shade smooth. Once we're done with some of these vertexes, we can start pulling out these edge loops to blow out the character and create more curvature, create more of that 3D shape. If the character was mirrored to the other side, there's an actual symmetry button at the top where it says X, Y, and Z. So if I turn that on, I could probably pull out the edges much easier, but our character isn't symmetric. So that's why I had to pull it out one by one, which is what I normally do from left to right. You can also start from right to left if that's how you read things or see things. As I'm going through my 3D model, I do knife into areas where I think there should be knifed, like this area with the arm. I felt like there should be an extra line right here from that top vertex all the way down to the bottom. So I knifed that. That makes sense to me. To keep everything organized, it's just straight and it makes sense. I'll just knife into my shape if I need to and dissolve any edges that are like triangles. I try to keep it as quads. I don't know. It just makes more sense to me. If I do it that way, it's easier to wrap a texture on top. I think it's much easier for the processing in a game engine if you use triangles. My character designs and my 3D models are actually very low poly. There's not much on it anyways, so I don't think it really matters as much as something that's more complex. But I think if you have a complex character, it's best to do everything in triangles, but most of it is going to be quads for me because I'm practicing on just getting the 3D model created, having it look the best it can for the most simplest ways for my simple characters, and then just applying a texture on top of it. That's the glitchy way of making characters. I'm just going to keep saying that until it's a part of my own model and my own tagline. I'm just trying to make that a habit. It's going to be pretty cool to keep repeating that over and over. Other people will also remember that tagline. We're doing pretty good on the left side. It's going to be pretty much the same across the entire character, and the bottom is pretty straightforward. You just make your way through each separate parts of your 3D model. It's easier to break it down into different groups so you can visualize it so much better. That way, you'll know that each part of your character is being properly pulled out to create the curvature, and you don't have to worry about it. This is something I skip anyways. If you use the cube and the subdivision surface modifier and you're familiar with that process, we don't actually have to do any of this pulling out of the edges. Definitely you can skip to that if you want, but this is just how I started. This is how I practiced. This is how I plan to use to create a lot of different things. If I need to, something quick that's a little bit more abstract with a very different shape that we can't really use normal shapes with. That's why it's just easier to use the plane method sometimes. I've been able to successfully make a lot of characters this way, so if it works, it works. You don't need to worry too much about it. As long as you're not spending way too much time and it's getting out of the way, I'm able to move forward with my character designs, and that's pretty cool for me. I know I've been trying to work on speeding through a lot of these videos, but I actually like explaining a lot of my characters. I feel like there are certain things that I didn't get to explain for some of the videos. Since it catches my attention, it's just better to say it during the video. Now we're actually finishing off, pulling out the edge loops by rows now. This shape is actually turning out pretty rounded. It's very different if you compare it to my beginning characters that I started with. If you've been watching all the videos, you definitely see the progress that I've been making. It's not the best, but it's definitely gotten better on how I pull out the shapes, how I got my 3D characters a little bit more rounded. Things just make much more sense now when I'm using Blender. I guess I don't have to remember things as much. Some things are based on the hotkeys that I remember. When I'm actually typing or pressing buttons on the keyboard is actually just happening based off muscle memory. Definitely learn your hotkeys if you can. Just try to remember one, and once you remember that, move over to the next hotkey. But you're gonna have to be consistent. Otherwise, if you stop, you probably forget things. I'm also in Blender quite often because that's just part of my workflow. Creating characters is something that I've been focusing on as of lately, and it's just pretty cool content to talk about. I just think characters are pretty cool, and it's a very important part of my journey. I don't try to rush it. I just try to learn as much as possible during this time while my mind is very focused on it. I have a long list of characters sets that I hopefully can run through all of them, but I don't know if I'll be able to. Once I find that idea that I really like, I'd rather just spend my time building out that game idea. That's going to take away the time from creating more characters. Once we finish with that game, I'll be able to get back on the characters so we can create a new game. That's going to be my new process. I'm looking forward to it. I'm pretty ready to create as much as I can. I just have more knowledge and skill set than I did before, so that's the fun part. All right, this brings us to the UV unwrap portion of Spooky Ghosts for character 3.3. I'll grab this edge loop in the middle. This is what I normally select. Don't forget to go into UV editing, add a new texture, character 3_3_ texture. Click OK. I turn on the UV sync selection. That way you can see all the UVs live while I mark the seams. This is probably when I started to implement this. In the previous characters, I was doing it manually, where I would mark the seam and then just press U and unwrap. This time, I'm actually in UV sync selection. Doing it this way actually makes more sense because you can see your UVs unwrap on the left side. I mark the middle edge loop. As soon as I do that, you can see our UVs on the left side. Since I marked it in the middle, we'll get this one large island. The mirror modifier is on, so we'll just have two of the same islands if we did apply the mirror modifier. If we select the eyes as well, you can see this is what the UVs look like when you don't mark the seams. It's a bunch of quads or squares. You have to give Blender some information on where you want to mark the seams so that Blender knows how to unwrap your shape. I select this back circular edge loop, mark that seam. It actually split into two islands without me having to mark the seam on the right eye, which is interesting. But when we select that edge loop, it highlights it on the left, but I mark it anyways. That's interesting. I didn't notice that. I forgot to turn on the shortcut add-on. I usually have to stop the shortcut add-on and restart it again. Every time I finish a process in Blender, like blocking out or UV unwrap, the hotkeys sort of mess up. I'm not sure why, so that's why I'm restarting it. To organize the eyes, I uncheck UV sync selection, press A to select the entire mesh. That shows us our UVs. You can make changes this way without moving your UVs around. I grab this top edge and press align edge, and that straightens out the eye UVs. That's a simple way to do it compared to how we did it with the UV sphere, where I had to manually rotate it. I think using the cube with a subdivision surface modifier has benefits over the UV sphere. It's just easier to align. I turn on UV sync selection again so that when I select an edge on the mesh, I can see that it matches up with the UVs on the left side. That's how you know everything is correct, because sometimes the mesh looks correct on the right side, but the UVs might be upside down on the left side. That's the reason why you would have it on, to make sure all your vertices, edges, or faces are all in the right position, because that's going to be super beneficial for texture painting, just to make sure you apply the correct textures on top, especially for the eyes. Most likely I will be either filling it in with a solid color or having some sort of pupil. There'll be like a two-tone color, like a white color and a black pupil. Needing the UVs to be in the right position is super important. Since the eyes are pretty much the same, we can actually stack them on top of each other. That saves us space on our texture. We can just move this out of the way, somewhere that's going to be different than the other UVs for the rest of the body. I select the body, press A to select all, and it highlights the mesh. We can see this UV is on the left. It's not aligned yet. You can eyeball it to see that it's not correct, similar to the right side. You can see on the left side, the right arm is on the left and then the left arm is on the right. So we need to rotate this to make sure it's correct. We need to mirror it so that it makes sense. This is how I organize my UVs. It just makes much more sense to me doing it this way. Both sides are the same. Your UVs are facing the same direction, similar to the mesh on the right side. I don't know if you actually have to do this if you're using other programs to paint your 3D model. I started looking at painting in Procreate with 3D models, and it just looks like I can just paint directly on my 3D mesh without worrying too much about the texture. I'll possibly maybe have to record that portion in a feature character so that I can actually have that workflow out. That's gonna be a while from now. I'm just noting that down in this video so that I remember. I scaled down the UV for the body. Now we can actually select the UVs for the eyes and then organize both of them. This model doesn't take that much space in the textures anyways. This is fairly simple. Don't need to make it more complicated. We know character 3.3 isn't going to be a superstar unless the people decide. I'm duplicating the collection so that we can create a backup. This one will be a mirrored backup of character 3.3. I made this backup so that we can actually apply the mirror in the mesh that we're using right now. I do have to look into what apply to active object only does, like link apply to all objects. I have no idea what they do. I just click one and it tends to work. Should try to understand it more, but I'm just clicking buttons sometimes and trying to finish this character. If it works, it works. We're just going to keep moving along. I try not to let things slow me down. Otherwise, I'm going to get stuck doing something I shouldn't be doing. As long as it doesn't affect anything, shouldn't have no issues. Since we applied the mirror modifier, there's going to be 2 UV islands. Right now, they're being stacked on top of each other. If you go on the side view and select the back UVs, make sure you're in X-ray mode. Otherwise, you're just going to see the UVs of the faces you select in front of you and not the faces in the back. If you go into X-ray mode, you're actually selecting all the vertices. You can kind of see that on the right side and the left side. When I do that, the entire UV island shows on the left side. This one's going to be for the back. It's in the same position because it's the same size as the front UVs. Normally, I move this out of the way and either shrink it down or just leave it in place. Because it's going to be just a solid color, we don't need the mouth texture to be on top of it. That's why you have to have a separate UV for the back and the front. I'm actually going to draw the mouth on the UV on the bottom, which is going to be the UV for the front part. For the back one, I scaled down to make it super small. That's how you're able to tell the difference between the two. I'm not really texturing the back part, so I'm using a solid color. We don't really need any details. It's fine to just use a solid color. That's as simple as it gets, especially for character 3.3, the spooky ghost. Doesn't need to be complex. That brings us into texture paint, where we can start texture painting character 3.3. We need to add a material to 3D mesh. We'll need it for both the body and the eyes. I'm using the same material that I use for character 3.1 and 3.2. I could have separate materials, but that just makes everything much more complicated because then you'll have a list full of materials. I'd rather just have one material, switch it to the correct texture, which was named by me. The texture from character 3.2 actually looks pretty cool for the ghost character. It's kind of spotted. It's very unique. So you can actually apply different textures on top of your character. The textures are just misplaced because the UVs are taking the colors from the previous character's texture and placing it on top, but it actually gives a pretty unique design. This is something you can do for your characters to get some ideas if you run out of any. Just placing it with random textures to see how it looks like. You can find a lot of textures on the internet. A lot of them are free to use, so you can just try to do that whenever you have time. For me, we're just going to use solid colors. We're just going to come up with different colors or use the grayscale colors I always use for my characters. That's as simple as it gets. This is just a process that I go through. It's going to be different. No one's going to have the same process as another person. If you're looking for a way to do certain things, my videos might help you, but just remember there's more than one way to do things. Every time you learn something new, it actually replaces your old framework or process. Hopefully this actually helps some people. If you have trouble finding something that works for you, I would just use someone's process to see how it works, see if I like it, see if I'm able to continue this daily in my own workflow. I've been doing this for all of my characters, so this is pretty much part of my workflow process. This is just how I've done it for all of my characters, and I'm going to continue to do it until I find a better way. So far as working, it doesn't really prevent me from creating my characters. I do want to try the Procreate way, where I actually export my 3D model into an OBJ with separate objects for like the body and the eyes, in this case for character 3.3, and then bring that over to Procreate and see how I would texture paint it. That's a different process that I think would be fun. I'll actually have much more control since I'll be able to use my Apple Pencil, which is something that I really like to use. I'm able to be much more free with how I use it because I'm using it with my hand instead of the mouse, which is very different for me. I feel like the mouse, I am not as steady, and I just feel like pointing and clicking with the mouse. That's why I do texture paint this way in Blender. I could get a drawing pad, I think that's what it's called, or a drawing tablet, but I'm not really trying to spend money right now until I actually need it. That's what I usually do. I only spend money on technology if it actually improves my workflow or makes me much more productive. Possibly that would help. I'd rather just use my iPad and draw the textures in Procreate if that's actually going to help my characters become much better. The character is all black because our texture is all black. We need to give it the gray color, which is what I normally do. This is my texture paint view that I have in Blender. You have top left, which is the 3D model with no grid in the back. When you fill it in, you can actually just see the texture without the actual 3D mesh. At the bottom left, you see the colors being applied in your texture based on where we put our UVs. On the right side is where I'm selecting everything, so that makes everything super easy. I can select different faces on the right side and then fill them in or color them in based on however I want. Everything's just pretty much visual on each of the screens so that it's clear what's going on. I don't have to go back and forth. I just like to have everything on the screen as I'm recording everything. It just makes much more sense on things that I'm explaining. That's why this view works for me for texture paint. That's why I have it as a tab. We select the eyes, use a white color. I think the white looks pretty good, but actually go back to black. And I don't really like using texture paint in Blenders because sometimes when you're just filling things in, it doesn't fill it completely. But you always have to fix it with these specific specs that kind of show up. It's like different artifacts in your texture. It's a little bit weird, but this shouldn't be something I'm spending my time on, but it happens. As long as I'm doing it with the solid colors, then we don't have any issues. If I actually apply like specific textures and like things start showing up where I don't want it to show in my texture, then that's going to be an issue. But it's good that I'm seeing this with just solid colors because I know if I use Blender to texture paint, quite possibly we're going to see a lot more of that. So that's why I'm trying to find a better solution probably for texture painting if I do use much more complex textures that I'm going to be applying on top of my characters. I think that would be much more cooler than solid colors, but it really depends what I think of as I'm creating more characters and making more games. We'll just have to see how my process improves. It's just going to keep improving as I work on this every day. My creativity is just going to keep compounding. That's just how I approach things. Go with the flow, keep adding on and on to your skill set until you know a lot of things to do. We're going to need to draw the mouth on the body. We need to check the face orientation. If it's red, which it normally is with the plane and we pull it out, we need to flip the normals, which changes it to blue. The eyes are fine because it was a cube that was within Blender. Now we can actually draw in the 3D model to create the mouth. This could have been a planted happy face, but based on the reference, he has this weird big mouth. We're going to try to recreate that. I'm in X-ray mode. I'm just painting directly on top, following the outline. You see, I'm able to directly draw on top of my 3D model now. because our topology around the 3D model is much better, I feel like, in comparison to the previous characters, at least the ones that I started with. Before, when we drew on top of it, it would make some sort of like zigzag lines, and I'm not able to directly draw on top of it where it would show correctly. This time around, you saw me outline the mouth. It looks exactly like the reference. It places it directly on top without having any issues. The texture actually looks like solid lines, which is correct. Also, our UVs are aligned correctly to the 3D model, but actually it makes sense that if we drew it this way, it would show the same on the 3D model and also the UV. That's the benefits of making sure your topology is correct for your character, especially if you're trying to put some textures on top of your 3D models. It makes sense to pay attention to all of that as you're creating your character. Otherwise, when you have a bunch of edges or vertices all over the place, things won't come out correctly when you texture paint. Make sure you do that before you actually get to your complex characters, which is why I do it with simple characters first. I need to understand how everything works as simple as possible. The most simplest character that you can create. Start learning how everything works when you actually get to your complex characters. Then you won't really run into any issues. You've already done this with your simple characters, like how I'm doing here. The next time around, I know, okay, since our topology was good in characters X, Y, and Z, then I'll need to make sure the topology is pretty good for the new characters. You can always review how I did my topology across all my characters to see the differences that I was making. That's why it's cool narrating everything and talking about everything I did for each of the characters. I can always refer back to all of this. It's pretty resourceful for a lot of people, especially for me. Since I'm recording so much things for each character, it's hard to remember what I actually talk about unless I recorded everything and have something to refer to. Every character is going to be different. That's the cool part about my videos. I try to explain everything in the most simplest terms, but also every video is different. I've actually been doing different things for each character, so you actually learn a lot of new things as you're watching all of my videos. So hopefully that's pretty helpful. At least it's helpful for me to actually go back and see all this. I really just forgot everything that I did since these are old videos and I'm just playing catch up. We're filling in the mouth now. Since we have the outline, I can just fill in the inside by drawing it in, or I think you can just drop the paint bucket and it would have filled it in. Now we're going to X-ray mode. This looks dead on to my reference. The mouth is actually pretty cool this way. I think it looks pretty good. It's definitely abstract. I undid that. I'm not sure why. I thought that looked pretty good. I'm not sure why I didn't keep that. But I undid that. I'm going to save the texture first. I'm probably going to redraw the mouth where it actually looks better, I guess. I actually liked how it looked, but maybe at the time I didn't. So that's why I changed my mind. Whenever I change my mind during these situations, I'm probably thinking about trying a different design. That's why I saved the texture. It's normally what I do. I'll save a backup just in case, and then start experimenting with something new in my workflow with the character. This time, I'm actually scaling down the paintbrush so that our lines is much thinner, because I guess it was a little bit too thick. I'm going to be following this outline as best as I can, but I guess I'm coming up with a new mouth that's much more symmetric in a way. Kind of symmetric, kind of not. The top part looks pretty good. Now the character 3.3 actually has some sort of smirk on its face. As a ghost, this actually looks pretty good for the ghost. These are different expressions that I could have for the spooky ghosts if I just have different textures for the mouth positions. I think you can change the animation based on the texture position. I just never tried it myself. I know I've seen videos on it. Maybe I'll try it, but that's something I need to experiment with. I haven't gotten there. I'm trying to avoid a lot of the detailing where I'm animating very specific parts on my characters, like the eyes and the mouth. Stuff like that I'm trying to avoid. I'm just trying to animate specific body parts and create some sort of different cycles, like a walk cycle, a jump cycle. Just getting familiar with that process first, animating the body for all my characters. Once I know that, then we can start including different things like the eyes and the mouth. That's just adding on to more of a complex animation to me. Right now, we just need some simple animations to get the idea across. A lot of it is usually just utilizing the body of our character and getting our point across. A lot of it is going to have static eyes. Most of them are going to have like big eyes and their pupils and irises showing. That's about it. There's not going to be like blinking or anything just yet until I create probably a full game and then release that game. And then we can go in and polish and make our characters or objects much better. But I haven't gotten to that part yet. Simple first, get through the process, and then start integrating more complex things. That's just how I do things. Makes more sense to me. Don't make your life harder than it already is. This is how you just remember things that are going to take a lot of time to remember. You're just practicing the simplest things over and over. That's how I do things. I'm trying to draw a very unique mouth that's different than the reference for character 3.3, the spooky ghost. I'm doing this with the mouse. It's a little bit more tricky for me because I have to be a little more steadier using the mouse versus if I was doing this with my hand with the Apple Pencil. I was definitely moving a little bit slower to get more perfect lines. Once you have the outline, you can just fill in the inside, which is super simple. This mouth makes much more sense. It's a little bit more symmetric. It doesn't really look like a mouth now to me. It kind of looks like a mustache. This can actually be some sort of mustache on the ghost. I see various different things when I'm looking at the characters versus during the time I was actually creating the character. During that time, I probably wasn't really thinking of anything, but it's really different observing and analyzing your own work, and then different ideas actually come to mind. Definitely seeing something different for the spooky ghost. We'll just see where I actually take it. I'm selecting these faces around the arms, also the faces under the arm. Most likely I'm going to fill it in with a darker color because that's like the shading areas in a sense. At least that's how I see it right now. See what I actually decided to do because I don't really remember. I'm selecting all these faces around the spooky ghost and I'm manually doing this without any seams that I marked. This is a way to actually texture paint as well. You can just select a bunch of faces and then fill it in. Make sure you turn on that square button at the top next to texture paint. It will only let you paint into the faces that you selected. That's the benefit of it. Let's fill this color in so we can see what I'm trying to do. This looks pretty cool as a black color, but probably looks much better with a charcoal color, which is much more suited for the gray color. Since we have a lighter gray around the outside, we have a darker gray. I guess this is like the shading around the entire character. This makes it pop a little bit more doing it this way, because then when we add the outline, it'll make much more sense. Now, a lot of my characters actually don't need the outline. I just like adding it because it's like a finishing touch. I'm just used to that process anyways, adding it as a final touch to my characters. That's how I know I'm finished, by adding the outline. You don't actually have to add the outline if you don't want, but I just do it anyways, because why not? Anything that makes the character pop a little more, why not? I guess this is what I decided for the grayscale color for character 3.3, the spooky ghost. This actually looks pretty good, surprisingly. I mean, this character was super simple anyways, but the little things that I did with the touch up on the mouth actually makes the character look much better. And then we have the gray color around the edges. Really helps make a simple character look good. This brings us into Rigify. So we can start rigging character 3.3, start getting some movements. Before we start rigging, we got to make sure our 3D model is centered. Make sure it's like above that red line. This helps it in your game engine, making sure everything is in its correct position, especially when you export. That's how your characters will appear in your game engine. It's better to have everything correct before you do that. Otherwise, your characters will be out of place and you have to fix it in your game engine. Might as well just fix it now in Blender, and then you don't have to worry about it. Under Armature, select single bone, check in front, delete that single bone because we don't need it. Under Rigify samples, add the basic spine bone. If the cursor isn't on your bone, you can go to the top and select medium points. It'll bring your cursor to the bone. I just do this so that it's visual on what I'm doing on the screen. If you have the hotkeys selected for when you grab your objects, that's perfectly fine too. But I feel like that doesn't really show in your screen recordings and you would have to explain that. Or rather just use the gizmo sometimes. It just makes more sense with my videos. It shows that I'm moving things around with the cursor. It's much more clearer. I align the spine bone in the middle. Make sure to go to side view so that we can make sure the bones are straightened out on all the sides. Make sure you do that. Otherwise, your rig might come out incorrect. We add the superhead. I guess for the ghost character, it's pretty straightforward. We know there's a body. We definitely need that spine. We know there's a head and some sort of neck. That's why we added the superhead. Need to align this. You can do it as best as you can. The bones don't really make a difference on how you do it. Just try to align it as best as you can. Don't worry too much about it. This is all practice, remember? Try not to be a perfectionist as you're creating your different characters with their different bones. You're just trying to learn the process as best as you can and improve by 1% for each character. At the end, you'll be able to do so many things with all the knowledge that you learned, which is how I got to character 3.3 so far. I think I'm doing a pretty good job learning a lot of things as quick as possible. I haven't learned everything just yet. This is just how I try to do it. We need to connect the spine to the neck. Select the top endpoint of the spine, Shift S, it'll bring up this menu. Select cursor to selected. Select the endpoint of the neck. Shift S, press selection to cursor. That will bring the two endpoints together. Go into side view to make sure the neck and the head is aligned. Everything is straightened out as best as you can. That looks pretty good. Now for the arms, what did I use for the arms? Probably used a tentacle or something. Normally a basic one I use. Yep, I used a tentacle. The arms, you can eyeball this. Doesn't have to be perfect. You just need to have some sort of movement for the top and I guess the bottom. I don't know if extruding this extra bone actually worked. I forget, but we'll see how that happens. I was trying to get some movements for the top of the arm and movement for the bottom by extruding these bones. This looks a little bit messy. Normally when you try something new with Rigify, you want to just test your rig right away to see if it'll even generate. I will just do that right now, even though we're not finished. When you press generate rig, if at the bottom it says successfully generated, that means your rig would have definitely worked. So you want to double check everything, check in front to see how the rig looks like. It looks like my new bones didn't really do anything when I extruded it. Having those bones didn't really help. It's just there visually. It's only showing the generator rig based off of the tentacle that we just originally added without the extra bones. Most likely it's because I needed to give the bones a rig type. That's probably why the new bones that I extruded wasn't working. At least that's what I think right now that I'm watching this. It's fine because we're just going to be moving the arms to get some sort of simple animation anyways. That's how I do things. If it doesn't work, we'll just move on the way it was intended. That way we actually move forward in our workflow and we're not stuck trying to create something complex when it shouldn't have to be complex. Just keep it simple, stupid. The KISS principle, which has been ingrained in my head from my colleagues and mentors. Keep that in mind when you're making your own characters. Keep it simple, stupid. That's just a principle. You can look it up if you want a more deeper understanding, but that's pretty straightforward. Now we need to align these tentacle bones for the arms. We're extruding it again for the bones on the left side just to see if this will work. Go into object mode. I try to generate the rig to see what happens. We get an error that says must be a chain of 2 or more bones. The new bones that we extruded doesn't really work. That's how I check to see if what I did works in Rigify. If it doesn't, I'll just remove it because you can just press undo. That's pretty simple. That's pretty straightforward. Now that I'm watching this video, I can actually decide whether or not I want to go back and try to figure out how to do this. Or possibly if someone knows a solution for that, they just leave that in the comments. Also, I'll have a reference point that, okay, this was a problem that I never really got to solve. Like maybe I'll actually solve it when I actually have time. Now that it's in video form, I'll actually remember that this was a problem. But then again, will this improve my process at all? Quite possibly if I want to make complex bones for rigging. Right now, I'm still rigging the characters the way I rig it, and it still works. I'm doing a lot of much more simple animations still. I'm actually using Mixamo a lot. I just feel like that's much more helpful for more of the humanoid body characters. Also, there's a bunch of animations to use, so why not use it? It's a free resource by Adobe, so might as well. I just wanted to learn all this for the most simple characters, because we won't be able to use Mixamo for my simple characters unless they have a head, body, arms, and legs. These simple bones with rigging actually works for anything. I can pretty much just use this for any character if I need to, or even an object that I want to animate. Now I know how to use the different bones. It's good to just learn random things that you'll need. Even if you don't use it, just learn it anyways, even though it's like complex. You might need it, especially if you're going to be making games with your characters. We could leave it this way, but I think I'm adding a additional bone because on the sides, we need to have some sort of bones for Blender to know that this 3D model extends out further. Otherwise, when you're animating, it deforms your 3D model and it doesn't look correct on how they deform it. So that's what I've been noticing with the different bones for my different characters. If I don't have bones in specific areas, the animation actually doesn't look good because the 3D model is being deformed in a way where it stretches the 3D model. If you don't have bones in those areas, it doesn't stay in place like how it should. Once we have these different bones, we need to connect them. I think that's what I'm doing. I select this right bone, shift select the spine bone, and press Ctrl P to keep the offset. I do the same for the left side. Select the left bone, shift select the spine bone, keep the offset. You're able to see that with the dotted lines, how those bones are connected to each other. We need to do the same for the right tentacle. Select it, shift select the spine, Ctrl P, keep the offset. Do the same thing for the left tentacle. Select it, shift select the spine, Ctrl P, keep offset. These are different patterns you need to remember if you're using Blender and if you're using Rigify to rig your characters. I said that like 4 times, but they're super simple to remember. If you needed to remember how to parent the different bones to each other or keep the offset, then you would just execute that pattern based on what I said. At least that's how I remember things. That's the most simplest way that I can explain it. That's just how I remember it when I'm creating the rig for my character. Once we're done, go to object mode, click generate rig, check in front. The rig was successfully generated, but when I'm looking at it, I don't see the rig for the right arm or the middle spine. It's a little bit weird. I only see the rig for the left side. So that definitely was incorrect. If it's incorrect, you can just press undo and that will just delete that rig that you created. That's better than actually trying to manually delete it. Just undo. Now we need to troubleshoot what happened because we did everything correctly, but the rig didn't generate. So what happens normally is possibly the rig type wasn't selected. Go to pose mode and then select one of the end bones for the different samples that you use. Select that bone icon. There's going to be a Rigify type. The rig type should be set to tentacle. For the right one, it was blank. That's why it didn't generate. When you select the left one, which was the one that was generated, we were able to see it says tentacle. That was the reason why it wasn't working. I'm not sure why this happens. It happens quite often when I use Rigify. Sometimes it doesn't have the rig type. If that happens to you and your rig doesn't work, that's where you should check to see if your rig type is even selected. Now that we know the issue, we can just select the tentacle for that bone on the right side. Normally the rig type is just on the end of that Rigify sample. You just need to check that one bone. The other bones are just connected and they don't have their own type. The new bones that we added on the side, we can just give this possibly a basic super copy. That's the same bone that we normally use for the eyes. Those are just like basic bones that I've been using for my different characters. I haven't really experimented with the other ones just yet. We don't really need to do that until we actually need it. I'm actually removing the rig type, which I'm not sure why. I think I just didn't know which one to use, but the goal was supposed to test out the rig to see if it works. Go back into object mode, generate the rig, and now you can see both of the tentacles worked, the left one and the right one, but I don't see the one for the spine or the head. We probably need to select that one actually. Throughout the process, you can just generate the rig if you want without even finishing it. Try to parent it to your 3D model to see how it would look like if you did animate it with these different layers. That's what I'm doing here. Select the character, shift select the rig, control P with automatic weights. That way it's parented to each other. You can actually test the rig to see if the movement works. This is how you would just test the movement for specific body parts. And then you can go back and undo and delete your generated rig. Just finish off whatever you were doing, creating your bones. That's how I use Rigify in a sense. I use it in my own way. We need to fix the spine bone and the neck bone, I think. They don't have their own rig types. That's very unusual sometimes when I add it. Sometimes they have the rig type, sometimes they don't. If they don't, you just have to manually select it. At least that's the solution that's been working for me if that happens. When you select it, it always works anyways, so you don't have to really worry too much about it. For the neck, we need to make sure that we select the superhead. I still didn't select any rig type for the bones on the left and right side, just left it that way. But I think having the bones without a rig type doesn't really do anything. As you can see, when we generated the rig in object mode, everything looks correct now. Everything has a rig layer, the head, the spine, and the 2 tentacles on the side for the arms. I select the character, shift select the rig, control P to parent it with automatic weights. Now we can start moving these around to make sure we have some movements that we like that we're going to use for the animation portion of character 3.3, Spooky Ghosts. I usually do this back and forth where I'll generate the rig and then just do a few movements if I like it. Then I'll undo and then I'll try to fix my bones to make sure everything is correct. We didn't even move any of the Rigify samples to their separate layers just yet, but we at least know the rig is going to be generated correctly and that it's working. We've already tested it throughout the entire process of the rigging portion. That's how we know it'll at least work the way we have it right now. But you can slowly do things in the Rigify portion. Just remember that there's a whole bunch of steps that you need to do. Now that we know the rig works, we need to rename the separate bones so that it's clear to us what they are. This is, I guess, part of organization. You don't have to if you don't want to. I mean, it just makes more sense, because then when you return to your characters, you'll know what bones or which. For this one, I'm renaming it to Wing because that's what I thought of at the time. Ghosts don't have wings, but they're separate arms, and that's what I decided to call it. I'm doing this with F2 on my keyboard after I select the bone. That's how you're able to rename the bones as you're creating them. These 2 bones that we added were supposed to be hip bones, but they weren't really doing anything because I don't think I selected a rig type for it. I did originally with the basic super copy, but I removed it. So I don't even know if it actually worked, to be honest. We need to create our layer names. We have head, head tweak, spine, spine FK, spine tweak, wing, wing tweak, and the eye. The head is on row 1, the spine is on row 2, the wing is on row 3, and the eye is on row 4. The bone groups, it's going to be a 5 and a 4, mainly for the FK and the tweak, a 3 for the special color. We didn't add the eye bones, but you can just add a single bone by pressing Shift A, and it'll add it at the cursor, wherever your cursor is on your character, and then just rotate it. If it's rotated weird, you can roll it under the bone icon by adjusting the degrees. It'll be straightened out. You just move this into place for the different eyes. I'm doing this to practice, even though we rarely use the bones for the eyes anyways for animation. I just do it as practice, and also it'll be ready if I do go back and decide to use animations for the eyes. So that's something that I normally do. I'll set it up how it should be correctly in the beginning. If I ever need to use it, it will at least be there and I won't have to go in and create it. We're already creating bones for our character, so might as well just add it in to that process, and then we don't have to worry too much about it. Once we're done with that, we need to move different Rigify samples to their separate layers. The heads in the first layer, the spines in the third layer. They'll disappear when you select the different layers. To bring them back, you just click the window button on the right side next to the correct layer name. If they appear, that means you move those bones to the correct layer. If they don't appear, it might be on the next layer or a layer before that. That's how you know. For these hip bones, we'll just put it in the same layer as the spine bone. For the arms or the wings, I keep saying arms, but they're pretty much wings. That's going to be on the 6th layer. You can just look at the values on the right side, and that's the layer that you're supposed to put it in. I guess that's how you know which layer to actually place them in. If that's easier to understand, just look at it on the right side and the values there. to help you. The eyes is on the 8th layer. You can see in the video, I was actually counting the squares because then I realized that looking at it on the right side actually tells you what layer it should be. I missed that because when you're creating the bones and stuff with a whole bunch of things in this process, you don't really notice much to it. You're just trying to get through the process like I am, but I'm noticing it now. Once you have all of this done, this is when you actually generate the final rig. In object mode, select the character, just select the rig, Control P with automatic weights. Go to pose mode, bring out the menu by pressing N, and then you can see our different rig layers with their separate buttons. We can turn them on and off. It looks like we're missing some buttons for the different rigs. We should actually have more buttons for the spine and also the wing. The reason for this is because we didn't move the FK and tweak layers for each of the bones. Since we didn't do that, I needed to undo our generated rig. In order to move these FK and tweak layers, go to pose mode, select the end of one of the bone samples. On the right side, you can see the layer is incorrect because it should be after where the white dot is. The white dot is where we placed our original bone. Select the square right after. This will be for the tweak normally. We also need to do it for the tentacle. Just select the square right after the white dot. The spine is the one that has the FK and the tweak layer. For the spine, the tweak is going to go 2 spaces after the white dots, and then the FK is the space after the white dot. Just remember that. Now we'll be as simple as it gets to remembering to move the FK and tweak layers to their own layers. Go back to object mode, generate the rig again. You can see that during this character, I was doing this process so many times that I was forgetting specific things in the process, which made me have to go back and redo everything multiple times. This is an important part of the reason why I record everything, is so that you know that you're obviously going to make a lot of mistakes throughout the entire process, and no one's going to get it perfect the first time around. As you can see, it took me a few times to actually create the final rig for this character. I had to do it multiple times to actually remember it. This is the only way you actually remember things. If you're putting it into practice, learning where you're making your mistakes, and then trying to correct it as best as you can from muscle memory without the need to look at a reference or a manual or checking the internet. You should know how to fix it right away. Otherwise, it's going to take you a lot of time to actually go search for it, and it actually ruins your flow while you're creating all these characters. That's what I really think about, is how can I do this as quick as possible? Even if I had to troubleshoot, I need to know the solution right away to help me get through this process so that I can continue on finishing the character for the day, if that's what I'm working on. That's my thought process, and that actually is good that this is on video. This will showcase that not everyone knows everything. Everyone on the internet has a bunch of tutorials, and it seems like they're really good at what they're doing. It probably took them several times to get it right. So they probably practiced that process so many times that it's muscle memory to them now. It looks easy, or even it could just be edited out and made it seem like the process is always perfect. But you can see that it's not perfect. At least for me, it's not perfect. It took me some time to actually remember the entire process. That's the only way to do it. At least you get to see how I got to this point based on my characters. If you do want to go through this, at least you'll be able to know that you're going to make mistakes and how you fix them based on how I fixed them. Now we have our final generated rig. We can finally go to pose mode and double check that our buttons are visible for the different rig layers by bringing out the sidebar. Possibly I made another mistake. I think I did, but it doesn't really matter that I made this mistake because we don't really need it. The eyes don't have a rig layer actually, because we probably didn't give it a rig type. Going to pose mode, under the bone icon, you can see it's empty because we didn't give it a basic super copy, which is what we normally do for the eyes. I'm still making mistakes, even though I think I'm finished, but I didn't notice it until now. Again, you can always go back and fix it. This was just my process, and I'm glad to actually have it recorded. I actually want to know all the things that I made mistakes on. I don't really care about being perfect. I just like to document everything as best as I can, and I can always go back to this time when I struggled to rig the different characters, when I actually get to a point when it's really muscle memory and I don't really forget certain things, then that's all that really matters to me. It's getting to that point where I can pretty much create anything without having to troubleshoot most of the time. I'm just creating and going through the flow because I've already learned it. I already went through all the pitfalls. I don't have to worry too much about it. I definitely understand there's a lot of things to get to learn to remember in rigging with Rigify, but I'll tell you, it gets easier as you progress and keep doing it daily. I think now I don't really make as much mistakes. I made a lot of mistakes in character 3.3, but that's bound to happen. These were very early characters. You can't really remember everything unless you're like a super genius, which I am not. I am just a regular person recording everything, and that's how I actually remember everything. I have reference points now of my own work. I can always just go back to see how I did things. That's just how I do things most of the time. That's just a way to remember everything. If you have everything recorded of your life, you have it labeled, organized as best as you can, then you really won't forget anything that you do. Even if you forget while you're learning new things, you'll always have a reference point and you can just search for it. Make sure to do that. That way you can be resourceful about your own characters, your own games, anything that you do. Just makes more sense to do it that way. All right, we're finally finished rigging character 3.3. We need to animate spooky ghosts now. Let's find a rig layer that we like. You can grab specific layers that you want and just move them to see if it'll have some sort of movement that you like. Normally I like grabbing the chest layer. That just seems like a good layer to move for an idle animation. At frame 0, I insert the keyframe for the location and rotation. On the 5th frame, I move it down by 0.05, put a negative 0.05. That brings the character down. And at the 10th frame, I moved it up. So you can put a positive 0.05. That pretty much brings it back to 0, which is the original position. At the 15th frame, move it up by 0.05. At the 20th frame, move it down by 0.05 by putting a negative 0.05. So that's how I do things. I use the most simplest value that doesn't really move it as much, but you can understand what I'm trying to get across, trying to get a up and down movement. And those were the values that I was using. It's just a simple number 0.05, either in the positive direction or the negative direction. That's easy to remember as a keyframe animation. You can do any value that you want. If you want more movements and more values, but that's usually what I start with. You can see the movement by scrubbing back and forth in the timeline. If you like it, great. If you don't, you can just delete the keyframe. If you felt like you moved it a little bit too much on each frame, you can actually just change the value. On the 5th frame, we know we moved it down by 0.05. That's why there's a negative 0.05 in the z-axis. You can just change this value. So I changed it to negative 0.025. That's half of the movement of what we originally had it. That way we don't have that crease on the 3D model. That's how I did that for character 3.3. You can see how that looks like as it moves for the keyframe animations for the following frames. You can always adjust the values. On the 15th frame, I'm doing it again, just decreasing it by 0.025, just so that the movement isn't too extreme where we have weird creases in our 3D model. Is because we didn't have a lot of bones set up where the 3D model is deformed correctly. So that's something I need to do for my future characters, actually, making sure I have specific bones that hold the 3D model in place so that we don't have weird stretching or weird creases on our 3D model. Once we're happy with a sequence in our keyframe animation, just duplicate that sequence to create a loop. That's why I selected these 4 keyframes on the 5th all the way to the 20th frame, and duplicated to 25th and 40th frame. Duplicated that sequence again to the 45th to the 60th frame. That's super simple to remember. We pretty much created a animation so far for our idle animation with 60 frames. We can play that to see how that looks. Now it looks like character 3.3 is raising its arms in place. That looks pretty cool. I guess I didn't like it at the time. I deleted the 3rd sequence in the 45th frame to the 60th frame. And then I selected the sequence from the 10th to the 40th frame and moved it over to the right side, just adding a little gap in between so that we only have 2 sequences with spaces in between. That way the animation doesn't happen as fast. It's a little bit slower because our keyframe animations are actually spread out more. If there's any leftover keyframes, you can extend your animation by adding more frames to the scene range, or you just delete those additional keyframes if you don't need it. You press play to see how the keyframe animation looks like with 2 sequences instead of 3. This actually looks much better as it's moving in place. The movement is much slower, so we're able to see it hover in place. That looks pretty good for the animation. I think I added onto this animation with one of the layers on the tentacle. Before we did the animation, I forgot to join the eyes to the body because it's easier to animate everything if everything is just in one 3D model. Select the eyes and the body, press join. You need to do this in object mode, otherwise it won't work. And then you can play the animation to make sure that the eyes are actually connected to the body. When I move the neck, you can see that the eyes aren't moving with the body. That's because we didn't join it earlier enough, where the vertices are correctly assigned to the different vertex groups. One way to fix this is to unparent your rig to the body. You can do this with Alt-P, I think. Making sure you select the rig and the 3D model. Press Alt-P, click Clear Parent. Now separate your rig from your 3D mesh. That way the body is separated from the rig. On the body, you can delete all the vertex groups because nothing has been assigned anyways. Select the eyes and shift select the body. I think when you do it on the side menu, actually, you got to press the eyes and control select and then join. That way you only have one body object. Select the body. If you're shift selecting, you have to do it in the middle and then control P to parent with automatic weights. Back into pose mode, check that neck layer again. Now you can see the eyes are moving with our body mesh. That's one way to fix it. The other way would have just been to assign the vertices from the eyes to the neck vertex group. There's like multiple ways to do it. That's why I'm thinking about it now, watching this portion, because I actually fix it different ways on certain characters, probably because that was the only way I remembered it during that time. I guess that's actually good that I have alternatives. At least we know how to troubleshoot this issue. I know this was something that bothered me for a very long time, where I have separate parts that won't move with different rig layers. That's because those separate objects weren't being assigned to the vertex groups. They weren't joined in the beginning. We're almost done with animation for character 3.3. I could have kept it this way. It looked pretty good anyways. During this time, I was trying to practice by adding on to my animations so that we can have complex animations. That's how you normally do it in Blender, by just keep adding on to your different rig layers. That adds on to your summary. You'll have a bunch of different bones that move for your characters. You have to do it one by one, otherwise it's hard to remember all of them on everything that you did. The spine FK layer that I'm scaling up and down actually looks pretty cool for character 3.3, the spooky ghost. It actually moves the arms, even though we're just moving the spine by scaling it. I actually like that. I keyframe this location and rotation at frame 0. And at the 10th frame, I'm scaling it by 0.8. That's actually bringing the arms in closer. I keep saying arms because they're arms, but I label them as wings, but you guys get the point. At the 20th frame, I was trying to figure out a value for the scale, but when you scale, there isn't a specific value you can give. It's not like how we were doing it by moving the different rig layers. On the right side for the scale, we know we decreased it by 0.2. To bring it back to the original position, we just have to bring the scale back to 1. That's what I did for the 20th frame. When you go back to 0, scroll up through the timeline to the 10th frame, and then scroll up to the 20th frame. It should actually scale in and out for the arms. It was a little bit weird for the 0 frame because it wasn't set to a rest position. At 0, it should actually be at a scale of 1, which is how it was originally. At the 10th frame, we scaled it down to 0.2. 8 at 20th frame, the scale goes back to 1. But this actually looks pretty interesting that the spine kind of moves up too. At the 30th frame, I scaled it back down by 2.8. That's pretty much going to be the sequence. The 40th frame, just bring it back to a scale of 1. It actually looks like it's scaling to look bigger, but it's actually also moving up and down. That's pretty much the idle animation I came up with for Spooky Ghost, character 3.3. To add the finishing touch, we just need to add the outline. You guys know this process probably way better now. If you don't really know, refer to the previous videos to see the outline process. I'm gonna probably skip it for this character. We're just gonna quickly get there, and boom, here's the outline for character 3.3, Spooky Ghost. This idle animation makes him look pretty cool. Really looks like a spooky ghost now with all the movements. You see how a sketch can actually come alive based on how you created the animation for the character. It's all really a process to give your characters life. I wouldn't have been able to do this if I didn't really put the time, energy, and work into it. This is how I created all this from the beginning. And this actually looks pretty cool. Surprisingly, this character didn't seem like it was going to turn out to be a good one, but I actually like it so far. We can actually drop this in a few games if we wanted to as background characters or something. It could be a cameo of some sort if we need a ghost. Normally, some games I think of definitely can have ghost characters that chase you around. That's an idea possibly that I'm thinking about maybe for a game mechanic. Depending if I do create a chaser runner type game. I do have one in mind, but we'll see if I actually use it. We need to export this FBX now. Go to File, Export, select a previous character's name so we don't have to type as much like I always do. I'm lazy. I'm not trying to always have to retype the same thing over and over. This one's actually named character 3_3 animated for BB. That's how I labeled it so that we know this is animated for BuildBox. That's what BB stands for. That's how we can clearly tell which character it is because we labeled it early on, and then we export the FBX. This process is also in a lot of my videos. You can refer to it if you need to. I'm probably going to be skipping a lot of the ones that I've always been repeatedly saying. So like the outline process, the export process. If you need to find that, it's in a lot of the previous characters. I'll probably reintroduce those processes as I get to more of the complex characters. That way I have more updated videos with complex characters with all the entire process. I'll just skip it for a few characters. This just makes everything much better. Less editing, easier to explain. That concludes today's episode for character 3.3. Spooky Ghost. I hope you liked this character. It actually didn't look as good in the beginning, but it turned out pretty well. I don't really remember much of the entire process. This video shouldn't have been long like it's gonna be. I'm gonna have to do a lot of editing, but at the same time, I'm getting pretty good at thoroughly explaining things. I think I have. Well, this one's a bit difficult because I recorded the process in separate days, so I forgot what I recorded in the beginning, and then now I recorded the rest on another day, and I'm gonna just merge the two to see if it will work. Blocking out usually takes a lot of time to record everything because that portion just takes a lot of time for some reason. I always tend to talk a lot more during that process because there's not much to explain other than making sure your mesh is aligned correctly. I use that time to actually talk about what I'm doing in the game development process so far. But that's actually a good time to actually do it. Yeah, I think this video is going to be a little bit out there. I don't know. I feel like this video is a little bit different than all the other videos that I've been recording. This one's a little bit off for me. I think I'm getting better at recording videos. It's just I'm being too thorough now, explaining every little detail for the videos. So that's making the videos longer. But I actually want the videos to be shorter, so more of a time lapse. I think it's good that sometimes I'm recording long videos, sometimes I don't. I'm going to try my best to make it more concise, skip a lot of the things that I'm repeating a lot, I guess, like the outline process. That's already going to be in a lot of the older videos. The export to FBX process. I think we can actually skip a lot of the plane process in blocking out. Anyways, hope you guys learned a lot from the blender portion of character 3.3, Spooky Ghosts. I'm having fun making these videos. It's a little bit out there because I'm always explaining things here, explaining things there, and then sometimes I don't. That's fine though. That's just makes every episode different. And I like that. I like that I'm not doing the same thing every time. That makes different content. It makes different use cases to see what works for people. If people like long videos, if they want shorter videos, there's a lot of things I can actually cut in between. Anyways, we're going to bring this into BuildBox in the next episode. So make sure you check out that video. It's going to be a simple mechanic. It's different than the mechanics that I usually come up with for my characters. So that's going to be a fun one. Anyways, we're going to end with the tagline. We're making characters. We're making games the glitchy way. And I'll see you in the next video. Peace out. You know what I'm saying? That's pretty good. I'm out.